This is the point where I usually try to start the show and get going. Wait, maybe I got Tim. Do I have Tim here with me now? Tim, are you there? Oh, I don't know what the deal is. We lost our Skype connection. Anyway, for anyone who's listening, this is the Annoying Peasant Radio Show, and I'm actually going to try to start the show right now. Here we go. A little audio from Mac DeMarco.
All right.
Anyway, that was a little Mac DeMarco. Welcome to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Do I have you with me, Tim? No, I must not. I think we're losing our Skype connection. I think that's our problem. Anyway, everyone, welcome to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. As usual, I'm fighting technical difficulties and trying to get things under control here. It's ringing, but it's I got you now, Tim, I think. No, we have somehow I got a bad internet connection, Tim. I don't know what if you want to join me in the chat for the moment and then maybe try calling back later and joining me at that point, that would be great. I'm going to try.
Sounds good.
Okay, take care. We'll talk to you in a little bit. Anyway, everybody, this is Annoying Peasant Radio Show. I was trying to get Tim, the Texas Father of 7, to join me, and again, I don't know if I've got some internet issues or what the deal is. As far as I could tell, everybody else is hearing me just fine. We're working through the board just fine. Anyway, thanks for joining this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. I usually start the show with opening comment, maybe a little bit of an introduction instead of an opening comment. I'm going to be going it alone, it appears, this evening, so please bear with me. But anyway, I want everybody to know kind of what the show is about. And I think for anyone who hasn't listened to a number of episodes or hasn't followed us on Facebook much, it might be a little helpful. And I changed things up for my little introduction here, and hopefully it makes a good point. I just wanted to say that, most hold that, the Annoying Peasant Radio Show has a radical political philosophy. This philosophy recognizes that we live in a world of economic scarcity. I seek social cooperation in order to avoid the conflicts that may arise from such a circumstance. You can imagine when there's economic scarcity, there can be conflicts. And maybe so far this doesn't sound so radical to you, but let me go a little one step further. Each person I support has an ownership right in him or herself, and therefore has the right to exercise sole dominion over his property. But I support that all people are equal in legal stature, that no one or no group of individuals can violate the rights of another, regardless of the circumstance or time. Now the application of that probably makes me an outlier in my political philosophy. It is in fact a crime to initiate violence or to perpetrate fraud against another. This is where the freedom philosophy rails against the common view. The overwhelming majority support such violations through the state apparatus. Most support these violations with recognizing as such, so they understand that, hey, we have to use the state apparatus to violate people's property rights to make things work. Some don't recognize that the state is actually violating your property rights. So all I can say is I invite you to listen to the upcoming discussion, in this case maybe monologue, and determine if you think those violations are indeed necessary. I would argue they're certainly immoral, but again, let that unfold as we move on in the show. I wanted to start with another quote here just to maybe support my case a little bit. And then in this case, I'm going to cite another article very quickly. But here's a quote from Murray Rothbard, whose birthday it was yesterday, by the way. And I should say birthday. He would have celebrated another birthday. He is no longer with us. But this is from Murray Rothbard. He says, "I define anarchist society as one where there is no legal possibility for coercive aggression against another person or property of an individual." I think that's kind of interesting. I'll reread that, and hopefully it'll sink in and people will really grasp it. It says, "I define anarchist society as one where there is no legal possibility for coercive aggression against another person or property of an individual. And again, so if you do, in fact, support the legal use of coercion, the state essentially, you do support that you could use coercion legally. And again, I think a lot of people don't really think about what they're supporting, and I guess maybe that's the service I'm attempting to provide. Oh, I wanted to go to, on that note, let me see here. Stephen Hawking, there's an article. This is from IFL Science, I believe, dated February 26th by Lisa Winter. I thought this was a little interesting and connects to what I was just trying to describe. Stephen Hawking claims aggression will be downfall of human race. And I just wanted to read a quick piece of this article. It's this physicist Stephen Hawking has been garnering quite a bit of attention this week as Eddie Redmayne won an Academy Award for his portrayal of the scientist in the theory of everything. However, Professor Hawking is also making headlines for a conversation he had with Adeze Uyanwa, I believe, a 24-year-old student from California. Uyanwa was treated to a tour of London Science Museum, blah, blah, blah. And Hawking points out in that article, he says, and there's a quote, he says, "The human failing I would most like to correct is aggression. It may have had survival advantage in caveman days to get more food, territory, or a partner with whom to reproduce, but now it threatens to destroy us all. A major nuclear war would be the end of civilization and maybe the end of the human race," he explained. And he goes on further there, and they make a connection to Carl Sagan. I don't know if few of you know Carl Sagan. But my point here is that Hawking points in, I'd say, without the philosophical underpinnings, without the support of a proper philosophy, he recognizes at least that aggression is looks to be a huge problem for society, especially, and I think most anarchists would agree. And the one way to really get rid of it is to not make it legal. And again, that's what Dr. Rothbard would be pointing out in that quote. Let me move on quickly to announcements. Agorafest 2015 at Villa Maria Conference Center and Retreat. That'll be September 24th to 27th. We keep threatening to have Nick on here, and we will have him on here in short order. But save the date, September 24th to 27th. All kinds of fun stuff. And again, Nick will be on to explain what kind of fun stuff. If you're planning or you're thinking of going to Liberty Forum, that's March 5th through 8th. You better get your plans in order quick. That's in Manchester, New Hampshire. One of my favorites, Walter Block, will be speaking there, so I would highly recommend that. Again, Liberty Forum, March 5th through 8th, Manchester, New Hampshire. If you have interest, Google it. You can find it there. Watch Justice. What's the right thing to do? I just posted, I think it was this morning, the 6th installment of that series. I think it's actually an entire course, the lectures. There's 2 lectures on each episode, so it was the 6th episode on there. The thing I thought was really interesting, he's moving into Immanuel Kant and his philosophy, his definition of morality, motives, a lot of things in there. Really good stuff on there. Again, I would argue the first 5 were fantastic. The 6th is certainly great. Just interesting stuff. If you really have interest there, I would strongly recommend that you obviously start from episode 1. The links are on the Facebook page. Go there. Another thing I posted that I, again, would strongly recommend people to watch and listen to, and this thing you have to listen to intently to really know what's going on. It was a documentary that, I'm so bad at these popular things, pop culture things. Is it the Grammys? I think it's the Grammys, the Golden Statue guy, whatever that is. This a documentary entitled Citizen 4 won as the best documentary, apparently. I didn't see it. I just heard that was the case. And there's a link to that, I guess, part 1. I think on this it's broken into 2 parts. The Edward Snowden story. I think it's kind of from Glenn Greenwald's angle. He does some of the narration on there, and it's interesting. But you cannot miss much. You really better pay attention. If you step away and come back, you might miss something very important. So again, Citizen 4 is also on the Facebook page. For the moment, I gotta go. I want to go back to my DJ console here to see. Okay, I think we're all good. I'm just checking it. Tim and Tanya are in there. Anyway, welcome to the chat room. Thanks for being in there, guys. Another one, finished a book, Conscious of an Anarchist by Gary Chartier. He's a former guest of this show. Excellent book. I would recommend that. I can't remember. It's only like 100 pages or something like that. It's not a long read. I would argue very well written, very readable, not hard to understand. As far as the text, the concepts, I know a lot of people will have a tougher time with that. Still, really, really cool book. Highly recommend it. That one is available. Again, Google that. I got that from on a site, the Outlaw Josie Wales, I think, from Josie Wales' site. And again, you can Google that. It's free online if you go to the right place. You can find his book. So the price is right anyway. I only have one news item, and it's really short. Leonard Nimoy passed last week. Mr. Spock, live long and prosper. Haha, that's my joke. Anyway, I got a kick out of those Star Trek things as a kid, and kind of sad to see Leonard Nimoy pass. Anyway, tonight the feature story is net neutrality, and that was, I guess that was kind of the story last week, maybe, arguably. I think it's a little bit interesting in a sense. There's not a whole lot new there. There's a lot of great details that I know Tim's into this, and he would know all this stuff or have a different angle. He would be able to add a lot of detail to this, but for the moment, I don't have my technology right, so I'm going to have to try to do this alone. But basically, I think a lot of people don't really know what the net neutrality issue really was or is. And hopefully I can clarify some of that tonight. I guess that's part of my aim here. I don't know if I have a real good angle on this. I mean, I don't know if I can tighten this up for everybody really well. I think you have to read from a number of differing sources and obviously form your own opinion, which you need to do anyway. I think there's no other way. I can't form your opinion. Only you can. Not like I'd want to either. Anyway, what is net neutrality? It's really the expansion of regulatory authority over internet service providers by requiring ISPs, internet service providers, to act in the public's interest and enabling the FCC to fine companies found to be employing unreasonable, in quotes, business practices. And I got a couple of problems even with that description. The public interest. Who defines that? What is that? Right? Every time a freedom supporter hears that phrase, I don't know, the little radar should go up on that and like, what's that about? And the other thing is on the last part of that is by employing unreasonable business practices. The question is, what is unreasonable? What is reasonable? Right? Those are subject to interpretation. They can be very vague. But bottom line, what happened last week is some FCC commissioners voted 3-2, and I believe it was a party line vote. 3, associated with the Democrat Party and 2 with the Republican Party. So the Democrats held their 3-2. I would argue, and maybe you can argue the verbiage isn't right, to saddle the internet with a new set of constraints so complex, vague, and problematic that it took over 300 pages of explanation to justify the 8 pages of rules. And by the way, the full context of this has not yet been seen. So you could argue, hey, you don't even know exactly what you're talking about. Well, I would argue apparently nobody does at this point. Even do the FCC commissioners actually know? That's a good question, I think, and something that really should be considered. Tim, go ahead. Try to call me and see if we can't get this to work. I'm sorry, I don't know how long ago you commented in there. It'd be great to add you. And again, maybe I don't think it's my internet because I think my signal's going out okay. It's either Skype or our Skype connection is the issue. Anyway, we'll wait for Tim to Skype me if he gets a chance. The FCC claims authority under both Title I of the Communications Act. Here we go. Let's see if we... How about now, Tim? We any better?
I can hear you.
I hear you.
Hear me?
I hear you just fine now.
Okay.
Okay. So let me go. We'll go on. We'll move on here with where I was. I assume you were kind of following.
I was.
Okay.
Yes,
and again, your voice seems to be showing in the on the board, so everything looks good on my end. So. I was just explaining, what's happening here with net neutrality, what actually the FCC is up to, and I know you've been following this a good bit yourself. But I just, I cobbled some stuff from a bunch of different articles, and one of them here says, the FCC claims authority under both Title I of the Communications Act as well as under several cherry-picked provisions of the Act's Title II. And the most controversial part of the FCC's decision, which reclassifies fixed and mobile broadband as telecommunications service, with providers to be regulated as common carriers under Title II of the Communications Act. That's the technical crap that was going on. And this is from Ma Bell, of course, from the 1930s is where Title II of the Communications Act really originated. So anyway, but the essence of there's the theory, or I don't know, the stated reasoning is that they're attempting to get ISPs, internet service providers, again, to stop blocking, they call it throttling, or giving priority to web services in exchange for payment, right? Like a fast lane and a slow lane. Is that kind of what you had heard about as well, Tim?
Yeah. So I think there's like you had said earlier, there's a lot of opinions that are floating around back and forth on either side of this argument, and I think what you pointed out is right on. That, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of this is conjecture at this point, because no one's actually seen the ruling or the decision or how it's going to play out or how the rules are going to change. All we know is that the FCC has basically reclassified internet service as a utility, basically to function the way that telephone services do. And so we're all kind of, and they cite, this Title II, like you'd mentioned, as the basis for which they're changing the rules on us here. But again, how they're looking to apply Title II and what kinds of other regulatory changes and fees. I think everyone is pretty much in the same boat in agreeing that fees are definitely going to be going up. Taxes are going to be going up as a result. Once you regulate something, that's another source of revenue for the government. So I mean you're going to see costs going up. The problem is that we're all sitting here wondering, okay, you've made this change. With no kind of open forum, with no open discussion with the public, or with how it's going to impact us. But lo and behold, the decision was made, and we're just supposed to trust that now they're going to take care of us.
Transparency was a thing, right? I don't know how was a thing is not a really good description.
Yeah.
But it was something that was asserted by the Obama administration. They were going to be the most transparent administration ever. And again, I don't even know exactly how much control Obama and his administration would have directly with the FCC. I mean, I guess you can always, maybe as the president, if it wasn't transparent, you can distance yourself from them and say, well, that's not under my deal, so I can't really control that. But you'd think, if anything, if you would be the most transparent administration yet, you'd be putting pressure on all these agencies to be transparent because, hey, that's what I ran for. That's what, that was part of my platform. So you guys have to help me live up to that.
Yeah. But I think, even that aside, even just the ambiguity of the change in the rules themselves, there are a couple things, some kind of catchphrases and hot points that have been floating around the internet that a lot of people are focusing in on, and one is the throttling that you had described, and particularly it comes down to Netflix. So Netflix is a streaming video provider which depends on a strong internet broadband connection for users to be able to enjoy that. Otherwise, anyone that's had slow internet connection trying to watch Netflix movies, you get about 2 seconds worth of content, and then it's just kind of like buffering, and then you get another 2 seconds, and then it gets really frustrating if your internet connection is very slow, or not consistent.
Right.
So basically, Netflix is the champion of this change in the rules, because they're basically saying you can't do that. You can't slow down speeds for users that want to access our content. And so, across the board now, you have to, whether you're looking up, whether you're checking your email, whether you're looking up, Twitter feeds, or you're downloading entire, high definition quality, streaming video. The companies that provide internet service have to treat all of those pieces of data, packets of data that go across our wires the same way. And so you've got to ask yourself, if you're a company that doesn't need 100,000 gigabytes of speed, that all you really need is just some basic internet connectivity, because you're providing small bits of information, maybe some pictures here and there, or you just even email or tweets. You really need to have that and absorb the cost, basically. Have the cost passed down to you to have that ultra wide bandwidth that you would need for high definition streaming video. And that's one of the hot button topics around this net neutrality issue.
Wait a minute. Say it ain't so. You're telling me that a corporation is trying to use the long arm of the law for their benefit? Seriously.
It is a first time. I know, Tom, that this is an unprecedented marriage of corporations, businesses, and government. It is unheard of. It's kind of like oil and water. I mean, surely corporations and government are never in bed together.
Yeah. And earlier to what you had mentioned, about the transparency and that the process wasn't really out in the open. My point was, it seems ironic that was the process that was used, but it's to make the internet more accessible and fairer and more open to everyone else.
Right.
I'm like, you got to be kidding me, you guys. You guys basically do this in secret because you want openness. Yeah. That hurts my head a little bit to think about that, but I guess it's kind of status quo for the system. I had a couple of things, but here's what you mentioned, went to the higher cost and stuff. Apparently one of the FCC commissioners is a, I don't know, Republican, quote unquote. And I think his name is Ajit Pai. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he said, that what you're going to have here likely, the order explicitly opens the door to billions of dollars in new taxes. And, of course, he had his fun with it. Said, read my lips. More new taxes are coming. It's just a matter of when. And of course, that always comes with, that's the game, right? And like you said, there are certain providers of content, or maybe ISPs. For all that, I don't know, that would obviously look to gain benefit from this whole arrangement. And obviously, that's why some of them, in fact, did push it, I would assume. I had a couple other things here, that more specific things. Title II reclassification also allows the FCC to impose a general conduct or catch-all provision. And again, this is something you spoke to, that, all the text of this is not available yet. How this will be administered, how these regulations will actually come down on people, how will they be enforced, to what extent, with that reasonable standard in there, I think makes things very vague. So I think the industry and a lot of people are probably going, I wonder what this actually is at this point.
Right. Oh, and Tom Wheeler, he's the chairman, right? I mean,
yes.
He has come out and said, This you got all of these alarmists out there, all these crazy libertarians and conservatives out there that are trying to scare you away. We have no intention of actually monitoring or filtering or putting standards on the internet, much like we do with television and radio. I mean, we're never going to do any of that. And my only my response to that is, I mean, when have they not? I mean, you look at TV and radio. I mean,
right.
TV and radio is heavily regulated, and the ironic thing is this seems to be, at least today, in today's age, it seems to be pushed by the Democrats because this is something Obama wanted, and so they're kind of marching in party line and going with their chief commander here and following step. But what they don't realize is eventually when the administration changes and the things flip over to the Republican Party, which they eventually will. I mean, it's inevitable. They just kind of go back and forth. Are they going to be so thrilled about the FCC now managing and controlling content on the internet with a Republican slant to the controls? And it's short-sighted. It's very, very naive. But to think that they're going to keep their hands off of content when now they have the ability to do so it's unprecedented. They've never not dug into that when they've had the ability to do so.
Agreed. It's cool when my party has the authority. We're in charge, and then we get more authority. But it's not so cool when the other guys are in charge and have that authority.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing. A former commissioner, Robert McDowell, I guess he pointed out that the word reasonable in quotes is perhaps the most litigated word in American history. Right? So when you say, well, it opens this up to just anything, which is, I think, arguably what the state wants to do. And I don't know if I think most don't really have, a master plan in their head. It's just every agency wants more authority. It's just natural for them to want more authority. And again, that's partly where my philosophical viewpoint comes in, that recognizing that is, in fact, a natural desire for anyone in any agency of the state. That's one of the reasons I have serious troubles with the state.
Well, and you know what? I ever since I will say that I started studying liberty and started studying that, and recognizing the fact that there really isn't that much difference between the Republican and Democratic parties, political parties, as far as how they achieve their goals and how and the use of force to kind of get the results that they each want. They may have different results in mind, but I mean the mode by which they achieve them is pretty much the same. But what is just beyond my comprehension is that nobody, for some reason, they don't see how much crony capitalists, so like your big telecom companies that are there because they have that power, they have that almost monopolistic. I mean, there's some competition, there's growing competition certainly, but they certainly haven't been able to get to the places that they are without the help of government eliminating competition or severely handicapping competition. And I just don't see why more people don't make that connection, that government is not there to protect the individual people. Government serves the interests of their biggest supporters, and that's big business. That's big business with large pockets, businesses that have lots of money for lobbying and for contributing to political campaigns. I mean, these are the people that get the votes and get the authority through government to do the things that they want to do. It's not your mom, pa, and home.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm with you. I don't understand what people don't understand, which not well said, but if you think about it, the free market, again, and I've said this before, and we got in the chat room last week, we were with a fellow, but, is just a summary of voluntary exchanges, and I know most people say, well, that's just survival of the fittest. It's a jungle. It's man eat man, it's horrific, but it's actually not the case. That's just a mischaracterization, to be sure, from my viewpoint. So, to deal with companies, to get the service that you want, to use your own dollars, basically voting in essence with your dollars will show where the demand is. It shows what the marketplace wants. Everybody essentially has actually an equal input to that, right? You vote with your dollars. Don't buy something that you don't want. Go ahead and buy some, or buy more of something that you demand highly. This way, what's going to happen now is it's not going to be the individual consumer or potential consumer. The marketplace is not going to speak here. It's those, as you pointed out, who can lobby, who can bend the ear of their congressmen, right? Who have that kind of influence, who really have the money to do that. Those guys are the ones who are going to be heard, and the consumer is going to be heard much less because it's, in a sense, that part is a zero-sum game. It's either, a free marketplace or it's a regulated marketplace, and it's a zero-sum game. There's only one hole. So if it's more regulated by the state, it's less regulated by the free market, and vice versa.
And I think what's really frustrating for me, anyways, is that people don't see. So when you have a lot of people on the left that criticize businesses and how they're greedy and they're self-interested and they're always kind of cutting corners to try and hold their position and their money. And they will along those lines will say, and then you get these monopolies and you get these big kind of mega corporations that corner a market. And they're the ones that are, the ills, causing the ills of society. And what really is frustrating for me is that the people don't understand that you can't. It's impossible to have a monopoly in a free market unless you have a coercive government that is keeping competition out. That is really the only way to establish a monopoly in a marketplace.
Yeah, that was Rothbard's definition of monopoly. Was that it can only be done with the use of force by the state to gain that position. And a lot of people point to things that are perceived and real abuses by companies, by private entrepreneurs, right? All kinds of things. And I'm going to speak to that here in a second, but that is an interesting thing. How are these ills going to be straightened out? Are they going to be straightened out by the use of force by the state? Or will the marketplace be able to straighten them out? And I think that's a lot of people see the marketplace as a much riskier or unsuccessful avenue. and they're I don't know. Well, I should say I think I know where a lot of this comes from. Obviously, and we could only talk about 900 different subjects here tonight, but education, I am using that in quotes. Public education is one, right? You're indoctrinated from so many places.
Yeah, I like to call it indoctrination. If you're talking about public education, that's really, it's indoctrination. So.
Yes, and it comes not just from that institution, right? It comes from, a lot of times it comes from home, right? Parents are indoctrinating their own children from neighbors and friends and all the institutions that one has to deal with, whether it's at the DMV, you learn the police, you learn to have to kind of get along, and you're taught all this stuff from day one. I mean, I was a little kid doing the Pledge of Allegiance. Do they do that anymore? I don't even know.
I don't know either.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're taught this stuff from early ages. So I'm going to say that's where it comes from, but of course that's not conclusive evidence. One of the, descriptions I had here was, that internet service providers will now have to jump through a host of new legal hoops. Smaller internet service providers and wireless ISPs struggling to provide service to the remotest and poorest parts of the country will have to hire telecom lawyers to ensure that they conform to industry-wide arbitrary standards of conduct. So it says, many have already said this will threaten their continued viability. So part of the net neutrality thing was to make sure that people in poor or underprivileged places or remote locations have the same access, because that's the idea of it essentially becoming a public utility almost. That's one of the ideas, equal access. I don't know. And here you have providers saying, hey, it's going to threaten our viability. So, again, go ahead.
If you think about the way the government operates, so I'll use Obamacare for example, right? So Obamacare is notoriously one size fits all for everybody. And there have been so many articles and things written online, but just an example is you have for women. You have a mandated coverage for pregnancy care or for prenatal care. even if you're past the age of
childbearing years,
children anymore,
yeah.
childbearing years. Well, unfortunately, the law of the land is you need to have that coverage. If you don't have a history of psychological problems or issues or need psychiatric care, well, unfortunately, the law states that Obamacare has to guarantee that, so you have to pay for that. It's not that it's coming free. Whether you want it or not, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to pay. You have to have that coverage, even if you don't want it. It's the same thing with the internet service that we're going to see. You're going to see this one-size-fits-all infrastructure, and like you said, the smaller players that don't cater to maybe the people that have a need for blazing video streaming capabilities. They just want simple access. Well, that you're not being fair there, because they don't have the ability, even if they're not going to use it, they don't have the ability to have those blazing speeds in that area, and so thus the FCC is now going to come in. And that's the way the government runs. What's
curious is you hear more and more talk of. I'm going to try to contrast this a little bit with cable television. You hear more and more of this going to a la carte. Potentially, right? Like, why am I paying for this package and half the channels I don't even watch?
Right.
So you have certain industries going one way and the others being forced to go, where these other industries in large part have come from. Right. And again, I think ultimately in the long term, the market will speak. And I think, a lot of this is going to have to go away or the internet essentially as we know it dies. Who knows what the outcome will be? If I knew the future, I'd be a very wealthy man. And I'm going to get to another article by Gary North here, which has an interesting take on this. But I wanted to go through some of the ramifications of this. You had mentioned some of this. So this little part here is what's the likely effect of all of this? Costs will be higher than they otherwise would. Now, a lot of people say, well, that means costs are going higher. They may not necessarily go higher because technology might actually, even with these increased costs to these companies, still bring the cost of the consumer down. But again, had these regulations not been there, the price to the consumer would have even been lower. Now, I don't know that costs will, in fact, go down. Maybe they will go up to the consumer. But I'm just saying even costs will be higher than they otherwise would have been. And that's important because a lot of people will point to one of my favorites is Bill Clinton raised taxes and people's incomes rose during that time. So they're saying, well, paying taxes is not a disincentive. I'm like, well, actually it is, but there are other factors at play.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just want to make sure people will be there. The other thing is there'll be less investment in this industry essentially. Right? If costs go higher and if it in fact does squeeze profits, well, there's going to be less investment here, and those investment dollars will go where there's higher margins or higher rates of return.
Especially when it comes to technology, I don't even know how many stories I've heard of and this is kind of this is dating me, but around the turn of the century, so like around that Y2K time,
yep.
Which seems like a long time ago for most. For me, it seemed like it was just yesterday. But anyways, around that time, it was unbelievable how many companies were still government agencies and government offices and things like that were still utilizing. I mean, like 1960, 1970 technology, which is why you had this whole Y2K issue.
Sure.
And this is the way government runs. They don't innovate. They take something and they just squeeze it and squeeze it and squeeze it. They don't create new. The market creates new and better. Government takes something and they maintain status quo. And so if you want to talk about innovation, you want to talk about reducing costs and also improving quality at the same time, the government is never ever going to be the source of that. That's always going to be the free market.
Yeah,
when you cut that incentive off, you are cutting off not just you were cutting off the life source of innovation, of the next generation of products and of services at a better pace, at a better quality, and at lower costs.
I challenge any listener to give us an example of where the state does it better than the market.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw the DMV customer service out there and laugh, and we'll move on.
Exactly.
The other thing that's going to happen here is the internet will likely become less accessible again than it otherwise would have been because the price is going to be higher than it otherwise would have been. So there'll be less people inclined to purchase that than otherwise would have happened. Right? So again, a free market would have had a higher participation rate, and obviously more investment would have probably than otherwise would probably get us a better functioning internet. Maybe higher capacity. I don't know all the innovations that are possible there on the quality side, essentially, but we're going to have a higher cost and a lower quality of service. That's what the state does for you. They do that very well. And the other thing I did want to point out is in Europe, where the internet is more highly regulated, and now I got to say more highly regulated because it's apparently regulated here. Before I could say it was unregulated to some degree. There's a lower participation rate, and internet speeds in general are slower. So, if that's an example maybe of what may happen here with the internet in the U.S., it doesn't bode well. And as you pointed out, it Probably the answer is it never does. So no surprise there.
Right.
And then there was some comment here from Pat Barnum. He says, forget the bandwidth issues. Here's what's the heart of the whole issue. The bottom line is bureaucrats can now review the fairness of Google search results. This is that reasonable word comes back in here. What's reasonable? What's not? What's fair? What's not? How do you determine that? Facebook's news feeds and news sites links to one another and to advisors will be looked at, right? BlackBerry is already lobbying the FCC to force Apple and Netflix to offer apps for BlackBerry's unpopular phones. Right? Bureaucrats will oversee peering, content delivery networks, and other parts of the interconnected network that enables everything from Netflix and YouTube to security, drones, and online surgery. So... Maybe this won't be good. But again, I got a little comeback here from Gary North coming up. So I'm hoping to end the show with a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And then he also says, when you hear the word fairness, you should hear warning signals there. Perhaps you trust the ability of one side of the political spectrum to be fair, something you alluded to, the Democrats and Republican, that back and forth they have. But, can you trust it in 3 years from now? 10 years from now? Like, who's going to be in charge? We don't know the individuals that will be in charge. So how's this going to be interpreted, right? It seems way too vague, and I would argue even if it was clear, it would be no good, but that's another argument.
And when it comes to content in monitoring the fairness of content or the, we used to say giving equal time to both sides of an art. I mean,
sure.
Just the idea of the government now coming in, and I know there's people out there. I know that there's people out there that are sitting here going like, they'll never do that. Like, there's no way the government's going to start, imposing standards on news feeds and Facebook feeds and in searches and things like that. I mean, I know there are people out there that are living in kind of this dreamland with the blinders on, going, that will never happen. But I mean, take a look at TV and radio. Again, I'll just go back to TV and radio. You've got arbitrary filtering and censorship of, we can have this on TV, but we can't have that. We can say these things, but we can't say that. We can represent these religious views, but not these, and so forth and so on. And it's not even just now. It's not even just a standard that the government will impose, but you have some very strong kind of political action groups, whether they're either on the far left or the far right, that are certainly going to have and use political pressure on the FCC or on the president or on Congress to use now the mechanism that's in place thanks to net neutrality and to Title II. they're definitely going to tap into that and start imposing their own standards for content control, for sensitivity, and for obscenity and things like that. I mean, you just wait. That is all coming as a result.
No doubt. It was the internet that actually provided that alternative to these things that you point out are so highly regulated, right? You could do a podcast or an online radio show, in contrast to terrestrial radio that's not FCC regulated. Right, and of course now the regulations may in fact be coming,
right,
and it'll become like radio. You're going to have a license to do this.
Well, I think of Howard Stern, right? So I don't listen to Howard Stern. I used to many years ago as a teenager, but I have no idea what he's doing now or how he's even doing. But he had to dump regular kind of broadcast radio and go into satellite radio, like a subscription-based radio service, because he felt like he was being censored, because he felt like he was being held back. I don't know if that's actually made him more successful or less, but
right.
But like you said, he jumped from the controls of the SEC because to an avenue that was, and I don't think satellite radio is regulated, but yeah, I mean, the internet served that purpose as well. The internet was the kind of outside of the reach of the SEC kind of censors and filters, and good or bad. It was a free environment where you can kind of say and write and think the things that you want to think, and no one could come in and impose their standards on you for what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Well, lo and behold, the FCC is now entering into that domain as well.
Yeah, again, the basic question is, how should these industries be molded? Should they be molded by the demands of consumers, right, and what the producers are able to supply? Or should they be molded by the money and influence and pressure, as you put it, that you can put on groups, and those groups in turn can put on these agencies to mold the industries? And I know most people, I think the common view is, or my understanding of it is, the common view is, well, wait a minute, the little guy in the marketplace has no say or very little say. So the way for the little guy to, for things to be fair is to get the state to make them fair. When in fact, that mode, it works the opposite way, right? It's perfect understanding, just in reverse.
Exactly.
You have a better standing in the free marketplace than you do. I mean, at least me, I know I don't have the staying power of a large lobbying group in bending the ear of my congressman. I'm very well aware of that. I mean, he's not going to spend any time talking to me when he could be talking to somebody who has millions of dollars behind him.
Again, I just don't understand the left's buying the argument that the government is somehow upholding the little guy's voice, is somehow protecting the little guy's voice, when clearly they are speaking the biggest pockets, the largest contributors or lobbying groups' voice. They're never looking out for the little guy.
I have yet to run across an individual that says, yeah, I was at the FCC and I told them how to do it, and they're going to do it the way I told them now, right? It's always, I'm reading online, I'm reading in various sources how some political action committee was working on them, and some industry leaders were working on them, and they got them to change and mold the industry in the direction they wanted.
Yep.
And again, but I think the commonly held view is, nope, that helps the little guy. It's like, right. Anyway, there was an I can't remember where I found this on the internet, but I thought this was actually kind of interesting, this little tidbit before I get to Gary North. Part of this is the net neutrality seeks to avoid, the blocking, the throttling, or giving priority access or to web services in exchange for payments, or a fast track or a fast lane in exchange for payment, right? They want to have the same pipes to everybody, so you all have the exact same access. But let's assume for a moment some of this stuff exists. Let's just say all of it exists, right? Some providers are, blocking, throttling. They're messing with the data. When you do a Google search, you get something different than another guy would, even if you did the same search, based on maybe what you did before, based on your level of service, based on your geography, where you live, who your provider is, all those things. Just assume for fact that actually exists. And I, again, in a lot of instances, I believe it probably does. But this one guy responded to this controversy, and I think he did a great job. He says, "So what?" And I'm doing this because people are going, "Wait a minute, no, that's not right." But think about this for a minute. If it's a free market, and I'm your internet service provider, and I'm blocking your content, I'm doing these nasty things, the things that people claim they don't like. In a free market, why don't you just dump my service, and when you seek a new provider, why don't you ask them, hey, do you do these things? Can I have retribution against you if, in fact, I find out that you are doing it, right? And I would say in a court of law, you could do that anyway. You don't have to ask permission, right? So you could do that. Now, and I just wanted to read this because this guy did do it with a nasty voice, but I kind of got a little chuckle out of it. So, he says, so what? Blocking content is fair. If I own an ISP and I want to charge higher rates for certain content, who are you to say different? Only a socialist thug would even contemplate your encroachment on my rights to sell what I see fit at rates I determine. Your only moral recourse is to switch to a different provider. Oh, am I the only game in town? Then, he says, shut up and thank me for being the only man willing to serve you at all. Either drop my service or pay for it, but don't seek to steal from me by forcing me to work as you wish. And he says, you, sir, are a socialist looter, plain and simple.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of truth to that.
I don't know who wrote that.
I don't have that written down here. So I don't remember.
I don't know who he or she is, but I applaud them because I think I've taken on that tone more than I care to admit. But the sentiment is exactly right. I mean, if you want to talk about the moral and the ethical thing to do, right? It to me it always comes down to when you are entering into an exchange of service for pay, there's really just two ways to go about doing it. Either I set my terms, if I'm the provider, I set my terms and you accept to purchase them at my terms, at my price, or you don't.
Right.
And that's really the only way for an ethical, moral society to be based. Anything outside of that where you say, no, well, you, Mr. Provider, you have something that I need. I can't afford to pay your price, or I don't like the terms by which you're agreeing to give them to me, so we're going to have to renegotiate something that you don't agree with.
Right.
Is completely unethical, and I don't know why it seems to be that the needs of the people, quote unquote, seems to overturn the rights of the providers or the businesses or the individuals giving service to also say, hey, I've got rights here too, and that my rights are, I'll set out a price, I'll set out my terms, you can either agree to them and purchase or not.
Yeah, it's, well, if I'm not willing to pay your price, I'll just steal it from you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, that's it in a nutshell, right? It's just a joke. And again, I've argued on the show many times that people don't understand or realize they're actually using theft or the force of law to get what they want when they do it through a third party, again, through the law, right? Most people, a vast majority of people in my guesstimation know what stealing is, and they don't really contemplate going over to their neighbor's house and, I don't know, grabbing a can of beans out of the refrigerator without permission. But when you use a third party like the agency of the state, you don't think twice about, putting more regulations on how your home should be built.
It's because I needed it. I needed those beans. I didn't come in and steal them myself, but I used I used the local police department to accomplish my needs, and that makes it not stealing.
Yes, That's how they see it. And then this conversation reminds me of another one, and I can't even remember what the exact topic or content of it all was, but Tanya was very good at pointing out, she got in a discussion with somebody about, how food or something should be regulated or something, and she was very good. Tyson Foods holds no power over me. Right. They can't make me purchase chicken or can't make me not purchase chicken. And so I don't fear Tyson chicken at all, but I do have some apprehension with the state because they can force me to do darn near anything.
That's right.
And so, again, when people, they tend to have trouble with big companies, I'm not saying I'm a fan. I'm just saying if it were a free market, it's a wholly different relationship with a small firm, a large firm, or a corporate enterprise versus the state. It's a completely different type of relationship. So I think a lot of people don't quite understand that or recognize it maybe.
And again, not to keep harping on this, but, when people put their trust in the government and they think that for some reason the government is going to be this moral arbiter that can kind of sift through the argument on both sides and magically come up with a solution to the world's problems that maximizes everybody's needs. I'm just scratching my head thinking where are you from that you actually see this in action? Right. If anything, government is, for the most part, an extension of the big businesses that have bought their votes, have bought their political influence, have bought their protection through the state. And so the government is totally in bed with these big businesses that you think are the ones that you're fighting against. The government is the reason why they are there.
Yes, that's well said and great point. So I'm going to move on because I think we kind of beat the dead horse there. At least we're very much on the same page, and when that happens. But I just wanted to point out so I'm reading all this stuff and I'm getting, I don't know if depressed is the right word. It's like, oh my goodness, right? You read all this stuff and it's all bad. It's like, oh, more regulation, more costs, more, right? All this is not looking good is from my viewpoint and from a majority of the things I read. So then I read a story by Gary North. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see this one, Tim.
I did.
He says the title of it is "The FCC is Toothless and Feckless," and I've seen him debate on YouTube Walter Block, this Gary North, and he does have a great sense of humor. He can really connect with the audience and make them laugh, and that's a whole nother discussion unto itself because he's really great there. But the one thing I can really appreciate is, he's basically showing, the bright side, if there is such a thing in this case, right? And again, I think it can be, more regulation, more costs, it's going to cause all these other things, less access, et cetera, all the things we talked about, doesn't look good, is what the overall flavor. Then Gary North comes in, and I just wanted to read some of this because I think it's interesting. He says the Federal Communications Commission is yesterday's regulatory system. It is bureaucratic. It is slow. Think of it as a dial-up modem. Alternatively, think of the FCC as the post office. It can announce new rules. These rules will apply in the United States, but there are 196 nations. The FCC has zero authority in 195 of them. Each nation has different rules. Anyone can set up a website in most of them. Anyone can select the best legal location for his website. You can't set up in North Korea. Cuba is off limits, but not for long. But if anyone wants to set up a website, he can find a server somewhere. There are no significant international regulations. Web search engines can find any site anywhere. These days, they have indexed over 4.5 billion, with a B as in boy, pages. The FCC will be able to control almost none of them. The number of pages will rise. To enforce this rule, the FCC must prosecute a violator in an American court. How many cases can its staff prosecute? How many convictions can it get? How many precedents will survive? Not many, Gary North says. Think of the FCC as the SEC. Think of every website or blog as a potential Bernie Madoff. I really like that one. That was good. How likely is it that the FCC will be able to enforce its rules? The FCC is trying to control pricing. It is setting up a system of price controls. When you hear the words internet neutrality, think price controls. But prices keep falling. And this is, I think, that really gives the advantage to the internet, to the web, to the innovators here, and it different than in a lot of industries. I want to keep reading here. He says, here is a technological law that has yet to be broken. Bandwidth gets cheaper. Here is a universal economic law. When the price falls, more is demanded. Think of the internet as a game of digital whack-a-mole. The FCC is the sucker who keeps trying to whack the mole. You almost got it at it that time, buddy. You want to try again? He keeps trying. It takes an estimated 100,000 employees in China to regulate the internet, but Chinese citizens can still gain access to forbidden sites. The U.S. is not China. The FCC is not in a position to hire 100,000 bureaucrats. The genie is long out of the bottle, right? And I want to. He talks about, the tenured and tired are planning to regulate this process from Washington. Some kid in India comes up with a new technology. What is the FCC going to do about it? Pass a new rule? Some kid in China will have a workaround a month later, right? And I think that's one of the big advantages of this particular industry that I think it's the FCC is never going to be able to keep up. Your thoughts on that, Tim?
Part of me is optimistic, and I agree with Gary in that sense that the market will always find ways to kind of work within whatever the frame is. So if the frame is set by the FCC, the market will certainly find ways to kind of push the limits and work within the framework. And I agree that we will still see continuing improvement in technology. Speeds will get faster. They will get cheaper, despite government regulation, not as a result of regulation. So I agree from that standpoint. The only thing that I would caution about this, and this is kind of like the way that taxes work, and the taxes, as you know, are most detrimental on the people that supposedly they're supposed to benefit, and that's the poor.
Yes.
So because they don't have the resources to hire experts to get around the system or to push the limits of the system, or even know kind of the loopholes and the ways to navigate through even the system legally, forget about cutting corners, but just to navigate the system itself with all the bureaucracy. It's the poor, it's the small business, it's the startup business that is going to have the hardest time in that environment. The big giants and the big names out there, absolutely, they will continue to thrive and they will continue to grow, and technology will kind of get pulled along with them in the riptide. But my fear is that this kind of regulation that comes down is going to hurt and impact those people the most, the small, the politically connected, and those that don't have the influence that the big players have.
No doubt. And again, to your point with the taxation, how you get out of the taxation, if I'm making $100 million a year, and I know this is not accurate, say it costs $100,000 to get a team of tax accountants, tax attorneys to get me out of $250,000 or $5 million. It makes sense for me to do that, right?
Absolutely.
But what's the guy on the lower end of the spectrum? Just I don't know, to see an attorney costs you $1,000. But if I have low income and I can only save $500, it makes no sense for me to even hire that guy to try to get out of my $500 worth of taxes.
Yeah. And we touched on this earlier. Even more so, the guy that's looking to start up a company looks and says, I've got to go through all of these hoops and hurdles to make sure I'm compliant with the law before I even begin business. Before I even see revenue dollar number one, I've got to invest all this money in making sure I've got Title II compliance, that my reporting and my books will I have an audit trail that I can defend if I ever get audited, or if there's an inquiry from the SEC. And so those are the businesses that we'll never see because they'll never take off the ground because of this insurmountable hurdle that they have to climb over just to even get started. And that's where we're going to see a lot of the kind of innovation and the grassroots growth kind of die off.
Yeah, it will definitely be stifled, which, again, I think is part of the aim of the big providers that are in this game.
Exactly.
I just wanted to wrap up here a little bit with Gary North, because he goes kind of for the juggler, I think, and in a fun way, I think. And again, if you're on the other side, you probably won't think this is too funny. But he says, the information gatekeepers are finished. They stand at the gate telling us that we must meet their standards to get through. Meanwhile, the walls are down. The essence of bureaucracy is this combination: lack of innovation, lack of courage, lack of vision, lack of long-term planning, and lack of collective IQ. Government is dumb. And so, in that part, and I read a quote, I don't know if it was last time or the time before, that, Murray Rothbard said something like, we don't want smart people to be in the government. We want a bunch of schmoes in there. We want people who can't find the doorknob, right? And I think, that's really describes, how many times do you go to the DMV and go, wow, this is just innovative service. I've never seen this before. This is state of the art and beyond, right?
They have a number system and everything.
Yeah, and it's a paper thing you're still pulling, Holy cow. So then again, I know people will say, well, there's no alternative. Well, there isn't, because the force of law has made it that way. But again, that's a whole another thing. I wanted to wrap here a little bit on this and just say, hey, in the end, time will tell if the regulation of ISPs will in fact inhibit the access and functionality in a significant way. It certainly will. The question again is technology going to be able to outpace it continually, and so it really has very minimal effect? Or is this really truly going to be stifling, and it's going to change the internet as we know? Time will tell. There is certainly some truth to the view that even if the state tries to regulate it, they can't keep up the pace with the rate of innovation. The regulation is always behind innovation. There's no denying that the state is going to have a deleterious effect on society in general, and on the internet access and the performance of the internet as well. So I don't know. Is there something I missed there, Tim, that I should have had kind of in our wrap up there and to go on this?
No, I think we hit all the right buttons there. But like you said, time will tell. My hope is that the young and the naive that were supporting this because because they saw some one-line blip on Facebook or Twitter, and that's that's why they called their congressman in support of this. I don't know, but I'm hoping that as we start to see the application of this change and how it will impact innovation and free speech and the growth of the internet, not the constriction of it. I'm hoping that people will start to see what this really is and go, wow, this isn't what we signed up for, and we've got to repeal this. So that's my hope.
Even the name of this is just another example of these guys are so good at co-opting words. Net neutrality. There's nothing neutral about this. Right. It's using force to get what you want, basically to steal what you want. That's not neutral, at least the way I understood the word. And again, they
should have called it net, the Internet Freedom Brigade or something, because then they'd really get everybody on board.
Yes. Well, I can't not vote for that. It's free.
The liberation of the internet.
Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to end the show tonight with a quote from Murray, or actually, this is from Lysander Spooner. I love his stuff. And this is just a really good one. I had to read it like 3 times to really get it to sink in. It's not that complex, but I'm not that smart. So that's why I had to do it a number of times. But just listen to this. He says, if taxation without consent is robbery, the United States government has never had, has not now, and is never likely to have a single honest dollar in its treasury. And here's the second part I even like better. If taxation without consent is not robbery, then any band of robbers have only to declare themselves a government, and all their robberies are legalized. Right? It's one way or the other, right? And that's the problem here. If it's without consent is in fact robbery, then the U.S. government doesn't have an honest dollar. If it's not robbery, then all you got to do is be a criminal gang of thieves and call yourself a government, and it's not legal. I think it's a bit undeniable, but again, I'm sure people will like to argue with that. But that's a Lysander Spooner. He's an interesting character and has a lot of good information. With that, I think I'm going to wrap up the show, Tim, unless I forgot something or I missed something important. Any thoughts there?
No, thanks for having me on, Tom. It was a lot of fun, and look forward to doing it again soon.
That's awesome. By the way, I have to apologize to Tim because last week was actually his debut, which it turned out it wasn't his debut because of my technical problems. But I think we got him a little bit better under control here. We still got some improvements to make, to be sure, and I'm going to change things up drastically here in the future anyway. But thanks so much, Tim, for being with me. I just love your insight, and you always add a lot to the show, and it makes it a lot more fun for me to do the show. So I'm very fortunate to have you with me. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Tom.
Okay, with that, I think I'm going to wrap. But I always, like I try to tell everybody, hey, tell your friends, heck, even your enemies about the show. We always like to have more listeners, and I hope some of our thoughts provoked you a little bit. Maybe I don't know, got you a little riled up. Maybe you did agree with a lot of stuff. Regardless, put your comments on our Facebook page. There's a lot of good stuff that goes through there. We like to see the conversation continue to build, and we learn from everybody's comments. So the more, the merrier. That's definitely what we're aiming for there. So everybody, thank you so kindly for listening, and look forward to us next week. With that, I'm going to say goodnight. I'll give Tim his last chance to say goodnight, and then we're going to leave you with Mac DeMarco.
Good night, everybody.
All right, here we go. Mac DeMarco. This is Saladace. Good night, everybody, and thank you for listening.